Hey, welcome back. Fall is in the air, squash and pumpkins are fully ripe, so today I'll be making a recipe from Quebec chef Daniel Vecina's book, Le Fruit de ma Passion. It's a butternut squash velouté with seared scallops and basil oil. So into a large pot, I'll throw a good knob of butter. I'll roughly dice an onion. This doesn't have to be too perfect because we'll be blending it later. Next I'll peel 2 cloves of garlic, cut them in half, and remove the germ. On these larger cloves it can be pretty easy to remove, but if you have small cloves then I wouldn't even bother. I'm going to mince those up. And now I'll saute these until the onions get a little bit of color. Now here I've got a butternut squash that I'm going to peel. De-seed. And chop into 1 or 2 centimeter cubes. Again, it really doesn't matter too much here since we'll be blending it, but the smaller you cut it, the quicker it'll cook. So we want a nice balance between the amount of work we're doing chopping this up and the amount of time we'll be spending cooking the butternut squash. All in all, we want about 500 grams, so that worked out being about half of this squash. I'm going to throw that in, mix it all together, and let that cook a little bit until the squash gets tender around the edges. Next up, I'll add in a liter of chicken stock. I'm using the box stuff, which is perfectly fine, but feel free to make your own if you got some spare chicken lying around. I'm going to season that lightly with a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. Now we'll cover that up and let it simmer for 30 minutes or until the squash is soft. Once it's ready, I'll use a stick blender to puree that all together. You could transfer this into a food processor, but that's extra work, and my stick blender did a decent job, but I still went in with a spider to grab all the little bits that didn't get caught by the stick blender. Threw that into a beaker and blended it in place on the side before adding it back in. We want this to be absolutely smooth so that there are no lumps whatsoever. Now at this point you could cool it off and throw it in the fridge for a later date, which means if you're going to make this for, let's say, Thanksgiving or some other family event, then it'll make things a lot quicker on the day of. When you are ready to use it, bring it back up to temperature, and we'll add 100 mils of heavy cream. Stir that in to incorporate. Taste it for seasoning. Make any adjustments now. And now we can move this to the back burner while we work on our scallops. So into a skillet, I'll throw a couple tablespoons or 30 mils of olive oil. Heat that over medium-high until it loosens up and starts shimmering. Add in some scallops. And make sure to dry these really well with a paper towel before you put them in. I thought I had, but there was still apparently a ton of moisture left in these guys, so my oil went kind of crazy. Now I use the pot lid to prevent the splatters from going everywhere, but you could also use one of those screen splatter guards with a piece of paper towel on top. Now after 2 or 3 minutes, let's flip these over, and they should have a nice golden crust on one side. Repeat that on the other side. Then we'll remove them off to a plate to drain. And at this point we're going to make a basil oil, which will add a little brightness to our rich dish. So into a food processor, I'll add a handful of basil, a little bit of salt. I'll throw in a little bit of chili flake as well, and about 100 milliliters of olive oil. And you could always adjust for consistency by adding more basil or more oil, depending on how thick or thin you want it. So blend that up until it's smooth. I'll transfer that into a jar. And now we're ready to plate. So this could be served in a bowl as a soup, but the recipe says to put these in a soup plate. So I'm guessing the chef wanted this to be more of a sauce for the scallops. My plates have little lips on the edges, so I'll ladle a small amount into the bottom of the plate. I'll place a few scallops, a drizzle of basil oil, and a few sprigs of fennel leaves for added herbaceousness and style. And if you had told me how little effort a fancy looking dish like this could take, I probably wouldn't have believed you. This is really impressive visually, but it's also delicious. Like flavor-wise, the butternut squash velouté is super rich, and that's really just from the butternut squash and the broth. There's not much else in here. Some onions, some garlic, and seared scallops are always a crowd pleaser and dead simple to cook. So I hope you guys give this a try, maybe for Thanksgiving or Friendsgiving or whatever else is coming up in your neck of the woods, and let me know what you thought.